Okay, welcome back for part 2 of the Persepolis Background PowerPoint lecture. Now that you've watched the first 10 minutes of the Persepolis movie, you should have a better idea of the historical context in which the novel is set. So let's get started with a little bit about key aspects of Iranian culture. The first thing that you should know is that the language spoken in Iran is Persian. This should make sense to you if you remember that I said that Iran used to be called Persia. You should also see that the language resembles Arabic. Those of you taking Arabic, you should see some similarities. The key religion, the prominent religion of Iran is Islam. And as we said in part 1 of the PowerPoint, Islam in Iran is dominated into two sects. You have the Shiite Muslims, and then you have the Sunni Muslims. First, let's talk about the key aspects of Shiite Muslims. There are three things that you need to know. Number one, Shiite Muslims mostly live in Iran and Iraq. And they're more conservative, which means that they like things to stay the same. They like things to follow certain rules. The big difference between a Shiite and a Sunni Muslim comes from who they want to be the leader of Islam. So every religion has a leader. If you think of Catholicism, you think of the Pope. In Iranian culture, in Muslim culture actually, you have to also have a leader for Islam. And the Shiite Muslims believe that that leader should come from the bloodline of the Prophet Muhammad. If you remember from your studies in world literature, Muhammad was the prophet who started Islam. And the Shiite Muslims believe that whoever takes over Islam needs to be related to Muhammad. The Sunni Muslims, on the other hand, also have some key characteristics. First of all, they're the majority of Muslims. So most Muslims outside of Iran and Iraq are Sunni Muslims. They're also more liberal, so they're more okay with changing some rules, as you will see when we talk about who they believe should be the leader. They think that the leader of Islam does not need to be related to the Prophet Muhammad, that it could be some other religious figure, and that there's no reason that that religious figure needs to have been related to Muhammad. In the movie, you saw reference to a whole bunch of players, a whole bunch of key characters. The puppet show that you saw explaining the history of the rise of the Shah showed you this guy, the Shah's dad. The Shah's dad, his name was Reza Shah, and he was the Shah of Iran from 1925 to 1941. And if you remember, he was put into power by the British. He initially wanted a republic for Iran, and then when the British tempted him with being emperor, he took that and in return set up a really nice deal to give the British oil at a good price. His son, who took over, his name is Muhammad Reza. We're going to be referring to him as simply the Shah. Whenever we say the Shah, we mean Muhammad Reza, the son, the guy who was kicked out of power. So he was Shah of Iran from 1941 when his dad died to 1979 when he was overthrown, as you saw in the movie when they knocked down the statue. Couple of other key players. We haven't got into these two guys yet, but this is the Ayatollah Khomeini. If you remember from your key vocab, Ayatollah means religious leader. So he's a high-ranking Shiite leader who actually helped kick out the Shah from power in Iran, and he actually took over in 1979, and that's what we're going to be talking about in this PowerPoint. This guy here, Mohammad Mossadegh, he became prime minister of Iran. If you remember, prime minister means he's essentially the president of Iran. And in the 1950s, he became the new leader of Iran. So the Shah, for a little while, kind of had to share power with him. Well, the U.S. didn't like that, and the U.S. worked along with the British to get that good price on that oil. And so the U.S. organized a coup d'etat. If you remember that, that's to kick somebody out of power. And they were able to successfully kick Mohammad Mossadegh out of power. More on that later. Final key player. These are the Majils. You're going to see them in the novel, and they're the people who make the laws, essentially. So the Majils are all religious leaders. If you remember, a government that is run essentially by religious beliefs is a theocracy. Iran, after 1979, became a theocracy. And this became essentially their parliament, the group that made the laws. And they were all religious figures. That brings us to what we've been talking a lot about, oil. So oil was discovered in the 20th century. So that is in the early 1900s. So in the early 1900s, it was discovered in Iran. This was a key time because this resulted in a mutually beneficial relationship between Iran and the West. So Iran had oil, right? But they needed money. The West, on the other hand, had needed the oil for industrialization, and they happened to have the money. Industrialization is when you modernize a country. So that's when you create technology and infrastructure that pushes the country forward. So Iran knew that the West needed the oil, Iran needed the money, the West needed the oil for industrialization, so they saw this as an opportunity to make money. So to make sure that the US and the West essentially got the prices that they wanted for their oil, the West installed Reza Shah. So if you remember, Reza Shah was the Shah's dad, and that's how they got the prices that they wanted for the oil. The problem was that the prices were a little too good. So the West gained oil, but Iran did not get all the money that they wanted. So the result was cheap oil for the West, but little profit for Iran. Now, in the 20th century, again, you have the impact of Reza Shah, right? If you guys remember him, Reza Shah's goal was to modernize Iran. He said that when he first wanted to take power. So he put a lot of reforms into place. Reforms are changes to make Iran a stronger country. He reformed a few things. First, education. He made education available to everyone, especially to women. He also banned the veil. So he wanted Iran to look more like the West, and in the West, women don't wear veils predominantly. So he banned the veil. He told people they couldn't wear the veil. He also grew businesses. So remember capitalism? He wanted to make Iran more of a capitalist society. And as a result, he created a middle class. Middle class is really important. In a society, you want more middle class people than you want poor and rich people, because it means that more people are doing okay. Now, however, to get these results, he needed to get everyone on the same page, right? So he used force. First thing he did, because some people were not happy with his changes, he made sure that the clergy, remember the religious figures, lost control. So they couldn't do anything about such things like the veil being banned. He also muffled the press, which means he didn't let them print things, because he wanted just the celebrations to be published and not any of the bad things that he did. And finally, he arrested rebels. So anybody who was against him, he made sure that they went to jail. As you saw with Margie's grandpa, he was one of the ones that was arrested. Okay, now, during World War II, something really interesting happened.